crying has many functions. Obviously, in a baby, crying serves to alert people as to the baby's needs, to alert the baby's parents. They need to eat, they need to sleep, they need a diaper change, etc. So that's one of the functions that crying serves, but that's not the one we're going to primarily focus on. What I want to focus on is adults crying, because the function and benefit of crying for adults is very different. Now, it's true that these actually benefits and functions are probably relevant for children as well. But when it comes to adults, we're very lucky that crying among adults isn't looked down upon the way it was not so long ago. The stigma of adults crying, thankfully, has been reduced a lot. So not that long ago, for an adult to cry was looked down upon. It was looked as weak. It was looked as immature. It was looked at as childish. And today, the validity and importance of crying is accepted among adults, is accepted and appreciated and recognized much more widely. And the reason that I say we're lucky that that perspective has changed is because there are many benefits to crying. And in a society where crying among adults is looked down upon, we lose out on those benefits. And the benefits of crying for an adult. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that, on any random day, it's a good idea to go and try to cry. But it means that when there's something that's bothering us, something that's hurting us, that we feel a need to cry about, the permission to allow ourselves to cry is a very good thing. Because there are a number of different benefits that crying allows for, that crying provides. Particularly when there's something that bothers us, crying is part of the process of grieving, of processing what's happened, what we're going through, the difficulties that we're experiencing, the sadness, the pain, the hurt that we're experiencing. And crying is an important part of the process of processing that, of acknowledging it to ourselves, of validating it to ourselves, and really allowing ourselves to experience the hurt and the pain, the discomfort, the sadness, whatever it is, which is a very important step in the process of getting to the point that we can move beyond it. And when I say move beyond it, it doesn't mean that it's not going to bother us anymore, but it means that we have processed it, and it's not pent up inside and crouching there and bothering us the same way that it was before, because we've acknowledged it, we've experienced it, we've gone through it, gone through the process of validating and experiencing it and feeling it, and that allows us to move on. And the hurt and the pain can still be there, but it doesn't hurt us the same way that it did when it was pent up and unacknowledged and unvalidated. And this is why I say we're so fortunate today that the view that, society's collective view towards crying has changed. Because there's so much benefit to be gained by being able to allow ourselves to cry. When we're in a situation in which things are not the way that we'd like them to be, and it's causing us pain, it's causing us hurt, and we're suffering with these negative emotions that we have inside as a result of these circumstances, once we've allowed ourselves to process all of that through crying, or crying being a part of that at least, we can get to a situation where we can still have the same circumstances and have the same undesirable situation and the pain and the suffering, but we can experience all of that in a state of far improved well-being. We can be much healthier and in a much better state of well-being together with all of that, together with those negative emotions, and we don't suffer as much from them. They don't affect our health and well-being the same way after we've acknowledged and processed it through crying as they do before. So the fact that, society allows us to cry more today means that we are better able to achieve states of improved health and well-being whenever we're in a situation that, that involves pain, that involves suffering, because we're allowed and we have this permission to do what we need to do to be able to be in these circumstances in a state of greater health and well-being. And this is why it's such a positive thing that society, is recognizing this and allowing us to be able to cry when we need to as adults. Because the lack of stigma means that we can achieve states of greater health and well-being when we are experiencing pain, discomfort, suffering, etc. And the suffering we experience as a result is reduced. The magnitude is reduced. The extent to which it takes over everything and makes everything. It just magnifies the negative emotions and makes those negative emotions really encompass all of our lives because they're pent up inside and raging to get out. And we can get away from that through crying. Now, recall that in the opening, I mentioned that sometimes crying can just make things worse. So the question is, when would crying make things worse? If crying is so beneficial and has so much to offer in terms of healing and being therapeutic and allowing us to feel better and to be in a state of greater health and well-being in the face of challenges and difficulty, etc., why would there ever be a situation when crying's going to make things worse? Why would I ever say, you know what, in that situation, crying's not really the way to go. That's really not the path forward. What would make a situation such that crying is, no longer the recommendation? Why is crying going to be less helpful? Just before we continue, quick reminder to subscribe and click the notification bell to make sure you see more videos when they come out. So the truth is that I wouldn't necessarily say that there are situations in which crying doesn't have the benefit that we talked about. But there are situations in which there are other options and pathways forward that have much more benefit to be gained than crying does, which makes crying not the best option in those circumstances. And in short, what it boils down to is situations, the value of crying is if we're in a situation where we have, negative emotions, it's undesirable, it's not the way we want it to be, and that is causing us negative emotions, pain in our experience. If there is something we can do to actually change the circumstances so that they don't need to be undesirable anymore, well, that would be a better option than just crying to alleviate the pain that the undesirable circumstances are causing, wouldn't it? Right? It's true that in these undesirable circumstances, crying is likely to alleviate the magnitude of the pain and the suffering and the discomfort. But wouldn't it be better when the option is available to take action to change the circumstances so that the pain and suffering and discomfort don't need to be there anymore because the circumstances are no longer undesirable at all? Right? In such a situation, to sit around and cry to alleviate the pain is really falling short very much, not because it doesn't have the benefit, but because we have a much better option. We could be eliminating the undesirable circumstances instead of having to cry to alleviate the pain and suffering that we experience as a result of those circumstances. And on top of that, not only does crying fall short because we could be taking action to change the circumstances, crying could actually be making things worse than they need to be because we know that crying is valuable and it is helpful and is therapeutic. We can, in a circumstance where we should be taking action, we might cry about the situation and feel like, well, I've cried, I've processed it, I've done what I can do to work through this pain and suffering and to minimize the pain and suffering I'm going to have as a result. and feel like we've done our job and move on, as a result of which we're just going to continue experiencing these negative circumstances unnecessarily, because instead of crying, there's action we could have taken to eliminate the negative circumstances and make things better so that there wouldn't be the pain and suffering to deal with and process in the first place. Right? So by crying, if the crying is going to make us feel like we've done what we need to do, it's actually a negative thing instead of a positive. If you haven't yet, click on the subscribe button, then click on the notification bell to see future videos. And please, again, share the link wherever you share things on social media, Facebook, wherever it is, WhatsApp groups, WhatsApp status, to help this message reach more people. This has been the Bites of Judaism podcast. This podcast has been made possible by Mr. and Mrs. David and Malki Smetana. If you found it valuable, please leave a 5-star rating and a review. It really does help it reach more people. And tell your friends about it. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms at rabbiglick.link/podcast. To dedicate a future episode of the podcast, send an email to podcast@rabbiglick.com. See you next time.